Well, guys, I want to do this one a little differently because I need some help on something here. Usually we have some issue to talk. It's something to talk about. And Steve, what do you think? And Scott, what do you think? And I think this, and there we go. This one I think is going to need to be a little more back and forth because it's been something I've been seeing a lot of, and it's really starting to worry me. Daily Wire, when they released the first episodes of the Cold War, they put up on YouTube the first episode of Apollo 11, What We Saw, and they titled it, Did We Really Go to the Moon? That was not the original title of the segment, but they basically did it to get some traction. And I looked at the comments on this, and the first day was from Daily Wire viewers. They were the first to hear it, and they were just couldn't be nicer, just fantastic.
Hey, Bill, let's stop for a moment because people watching this for the first time, Bill created this series, Apollo 11.
Beg your pardon. Yes, sorry.
And
yes. For those of you who may not,
he hosted as well.
So 2019, Daily Wire asked me to do a history they asked me to do something on the 50th anniversary of the moon landing in July of 69. So I did Apollo 11, What We Saw. I think it's the best work I ever did. I'm very proud of it. It was a 4-part series. They ran the first episode and titled it, Did the Moon Landing Occur, Yes or No? That episode is not all of the argument. There's a lot of argument in the following 3 episodes, but it's not the point because it's not even really about the moon landing. But let me just tell you what happened. So the first day's comments were lovely, and then I checked them this morning, and somehow the moon landing never happened crowd got a hold of it. And there were a lot of negative comments about me, which actually didn't bother me in this case. Usually they bother me, but this case, there was a bigger issue here. And it was just again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Didn't happen, didn't happen, didn't happen, didn't happen. I was trying to find a common thread here. And clearly the didn't happen crowd were being motivated by emotion because some of the evidence that they listed to support their never happened thing, I saw this 7 or 8 times. It didn't happen because who was holding the camera to film Neil coming down the ladder? You got me on that one, Scooter. I guess we weren't smart enough to figure that one out. For those of you who are playing the home version, there's a little panel on one of the sides of the lunar module that popped open specifically to show this picture. So when that's your only evidence, and somebody says the chances of it were 6 trillion to 1, and we tried it 6 times. Where'd you come up with that number?
So you're saying they can't imagine a selfie stick, basically?
It's funny you mention that. It's funny you mention that because when I was thinking about the reply to this, right, I thought, have you ever taken a picture with a camera that you brought with you, set it up, set the timer, and then gotten in the picture? Have you ever appeared in a picture with your own camera? Have you ever started a camera and a video and then walked into frame? Have you ever done that too?
It ain't rocket science.
But look, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I would debunk this, and I sent a text to Jeremy saying, dude, you ought to get the biggest moon landing denier in here and have a jury of our peers and just treat it like a court case. But this isn't the point. This isn't the point. And this is not what's upset me so much. What's upset me so much is that a consistent thread through this was that NASA has to be lying because NASA's part of the government, and the government always lies about everything, and therefore this couldn't possibly be real. And to me, that sounds like people who would self-identify as conservatives. And I'm seeing a lot of this now. I'm seeing a lot of people who are normally sensible people whose knee-jerk reaction is to say that if look, I could put this in a nutshell, right? If Joe Biden walks outside and it's raining, and Joe Biden says, oh, it's raining, then there's some people responsible. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Right.
They could be soaking wet, and they would say, no, it isn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I understand the psychology of this. I think the psychology is the psychology of a dog that has been just kicked so often and lied to so often. We've been so mistreated by the press, been so accused of racism and all this other stuff that you get to this level of just snapping at things, and it's dangerous, it's unhealthy, and it's worrisome. So when you see the vitriol that's directed at the idea that this thing that happened, I see signs of society just really coming apart, and not just the progressives this time. Now I see what I would consider to be normally sensible people who are determined that it can't have happened because NASA said it did. And NASA's part of the government, and the government's lying to us about everything. And so therefore, boom. And it's not just in the moon landing. I'm seeing this in a lot of different arenas now, where it is a reflexive reaction to automatically say, well, if Joe Biden says it's raining, then it's got to be sunny, even if he's standing out in the rain, right? So that's it.
The angle I've noticed on this is over in the comments at PJ Media. My 4-day-a-week job when I'm not here with you guys having so much fun, and it's the every election is now stolen crowd. If I'm writing anything about any kind of election, it doesn't matter what the topic is, how far away it is from election fraud. There will be somebody in the comments saying, well, why aren't you addressing the fact that elections don't matter anymore? And is it possible to steal an election? Yes. Does election fraud occur? Yes, it does. Were there many, many, many questionable things in the last presidential election? Of course there were. But the point that isn't addressed is it's not easy to steal elections. What can be done, as we saw in 2020, is if you are in a heavily populated Democratic stronghold, you can shut things down in the middle of the night and cheat to your heart's content. But if you're, say, in a Republican district where things are generally on the up and up, it's not possible to steal that. And I'm not going to address that issue when it doesn't involve places like Atlanta or Philly or Detroit, any of these places where we know this kind of stuff goes on, because the Democrats have a ring around the elections there, and it's protected by the local politicians, it's protected by media and all the rest. But generally speaking, nationwide, we don't have a serious problem. It's possible to steal a presidential election, but if elections didn't matter, we wouldn't have a Republican House right now. You cannot steal enough elections to move the House in that way. And it doesn't matter, Bill, what evidence you present. It just doesn't matter. The elections don't matter, crowd. Just show up, and you there's no reason to be done. Yes, Scott.
Just to address anybody who might be listening to this right now and thinking that Steve Green's video feed is being tapped, that's a woodpecker that's hitting the side of his house.
Yes.
And so if you're hearing that, yes, he's being tapped, but it's not by the government.
Exactly. I've learned to filter it out, and
I'm
hopefully
just
my audio
off the
gets
comments
checkerboarded.
that are going to come and say Steve's needs to stop tapping on his desk.
Scott, let me just sort of go ahead. Finish up, Steve. Sorry.
Oh, I was actually no. You go ahead, because I think I know where you're going with this, and it'll dovetail.
Well, just because somebody lies about something, and maybe because they lie about something frequently, doesn't mean they're lying about everything all the time. But here's I think part of the problem. Scott, several years ago, back when we were at the previous establishment, I got called to jury duty, and I was selected for the jury, and we got in the room, we voted for foreman, and I was elected foreman. And what I found among the jurors, and this would be 2008 or 9 or 10, somewhere around there, so a while ago, was that the police would issue their testimony, and clearly the instructions were, you must make your decision based on what you hear in the courtroom. And I encountered a great deal of, the police are lying.
Yeah.
And I would say, okay, well, what evidence do you have that they're lying? Well, it's because because police lie all the time. What I was able to put my finger on, Scott, is that when you have watched movies and TV shows your entire life where there's a twist at the end where what you think is going to happen, nope, turns out that the whole thing was the exact opposite of what you thought. If you feed that to people for their entire lives, they will be looking for the twist where there isn't a twist. We become a culture to this. We become desensitized to the idea that sometimes things really are the way they seem.
Yeah.
And when you've seen so many episodes of so many movies and TV shows where at the end you go, I thought this guy did it, but it turned out it was that guy. I saw this in the jury room. When you started questioning these people, they say, well, he couldn't have done it. I mean, why? Well, because it's obvious that he did it. I mean, there's so much evidence that he did it. That means he couldn't have done it. Right?
That's right. Because
it's all a setup.
Because the writer of a TV series would have set you up in that manner.
Precisely.
Yeah, that's exactly how they would have structured the story to steer everything so that you believe that guy did it when he didn't really do it, and then there would be that turn at the end, and you would be shocked. I think that's part of it. I think people are manipulated by TV. I also wonder how much of a role, frankly, people like us have played in it, because we are, in large part, social critics. We are constantly evaluating what happens in the news, and we're critical of the government. And we're unlikely to do a story, although we've done some over the years, that is, like, attaboy, government, good job. So if you looked at the
I would if they'd give me a chance.
If you look at the preponderance of stories that we've done, in some way, the government is doing something wrong, sometimes deceptively so. And so people get a steady diet of that, especially people who, would be in the comments of your program, would be the kind of people who would be tuned into this kind of thing and would be thinking, oh, yeah, well, I know that because, James Comey and Hillary Clinton and, whatever. There's this whole long list of people who believe that the government is always lying to you. And I think, honestly, I think we feed that. To a certain extent, myself as well, because not necessarily we do it disingenuously, but the things that we focus on tend to be the things that are disturbing. And what's disturbing is when a public official says something that doesn't seem to square with what the public official actually knows to be true. And so we draw attention to that. Meanwhile, a couple of million government employees are going about their job and driving back and forth to work and eating lunch at the same restaurant you go to and playing on, their kid plays on your kid's soccer team, and they're decent human beings. And tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people were involved in the Apollo moon landing mission, every one of whom had to be paid off to buy their silence about the fact that the whole thing was faked. It's like, oh yeah, well, let me just tell you confidentially, I was the guy who opened the door to the dome where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin went into the simulated lunar landscape thing where we actually changed the gravity inside the dome. Like nobody broke. In all those years, not a single person said, yeah, well, it was all fake. So in any case, I think everything in the media conspires to have you believe there's going to be a twist, that somebody is lying.
We're being gaslit.
We're being gaslit. We can't trust anybody. I frankly don't believe it's true. I believe two things. Number one, most people, including people I don't like and people who disagree with me, are trying to do the best they can in the circumstances in which they find themselves. And number two, we're all liars. Every last one of us, including me. In the right circumstance, we will shade, we will bend, we will curve the truth in order to not offend somebody, in order to accomplish an objective that we care about, in order to shield ourselves from criticism, or whatever. We have all the rationalizations that go through our minds. And, it comes down to the Bible is not wrong when it says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so when I look out at government officials, what I see is a bunch of sinners like me, probably trying to do the best they can, but still screwing up, sometimes intentionally, just like I do. And so I'm not as quick to judge harshly, and that's why I don't think, I think it would be more work. That should be the third principle. People are lazy. It's too much work to fake a moon landing.
Steve, you got anything you want to check into that?
Oh, sorry.
To this whole, anything you want to check into this whole idea of the twist? There's got to be a twist.
Yeah, my first memory of that. This is going way back. The '70s was maybe the original high for paranoid thrillers, and I remember seeing on the big screen. I was probably about 9 years old, 8 years old. Capricorn 1. Which was about the faked Mars landing and the astronauts deciding to bail on it, and then you've got the government gunmen hunting down the astronauts one by one before any of them can reach the press and tell them that the launch was faked yesterday or whatever it was. And actually, one of my favorite jokes of all time came out of that that movie, the squirrel choke. I'll tell you guys sometime, maybe on Backstage next week. In any case, so I was raised on that. It was always just a element of movie making when I was a kid, and there's so much more of it now. But I think the real poison is social media, and I know it's easy to pound on that, but it's because so much of it is true. The anonymity doesn't just tend to bring out the worst in a lot of people, and I think people already tend that way. But those are the voices that get magnified. And because of that, discussions that we used to have. My best friend in high school was a communist, and all we did was argue. It was fun, we debated constantly. It was a blast. But there's less and less room for that because as the loudest, rudest, most paranoid, angry voices get amplified on social media, instead of engaging, we back up into our silos and shout back, instead of having these late night bull sessions that I grew up having with my best friend who was a damn commie.
And the algorithms immediately supply you with more of what you just watched. If you watch a moon landing conspiracy video all the way through, then that's all you're going to get. Right? It's going to feed you more and more and more examples of this, going to reinforce the same talking
points. And you
points.
suddenly feel like you've stumbled into a treasure trove of information that's been hidden from you.
Yeah.
That's a big emotional driver, is that I'm onto the secret information and I'm awake and you're one of the sheeple. That's a huge motivator of all of this. One of the biggest problems, when I looked at some of these so-called evidence that people were putting down for why it didn't happen or couldn't have happened, I realized that not only are the issues that we talked about a big deal, but also we don't know how to think anymore. No one's taught people how to think, not what to think, how to think. And I can give you a really good example about this. A number of commenters said that the reason then they know that we didn't go to the moon was because Neil Armstrong said that we didn't go. And also Buzz Aldrin turned to a 4-year-old girl once and said, we didn't go to the moon. Therefore, we didn't go to the moon. Right? And I was trying to think of a way to show that different evidence has different weights, right? And so what I came to, it was I wanted to ask like a person who's like convinced it didn't happen. Are you a sports fan? Yeah. What do you like? You a football fan? Okay, great. You're a football fan. Who won the last Super Bowl? Well, St. Louis did. St. Louis beat Philadelphia. Okay, well, what if I told you that somebody told me that Philadelphia actually won the game?
You're, of course, talking about a fictitious game because Kansas City really won the last Super Bowl.
I'm sorry, who did I say? St. Louis? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's the Steve side of the state. That's the wrong
side. Sorry. I've already
okay.
shot myself in the foot in this argument. But okay. Kansas City versus the Eagles. Yes, who won? Kansas City won. Well, I got somebody who was at the game who said that the Eagles won that game. Would you believe that the Eagles won that game based on that evidence? No, that's ridiculous. What if I told you that one of the coaches on the Eagles team said that they won the game and that the results were faked? Would that be enough to convince you? Probably not. What if I told you that the head coach of Kansas City said that the Eagles won the game?
Who used to be an Eagles coach.
Would that be enough to convince you?
Oh, the rot runs deep.
Would that be enough? Or is the fact that you watched the game from start to finish, doesn't that outweigh the fact that somebody says, no, I've got inside information on this? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Anybody can say anything. That's not compelling evidence. And it doesn't matter if Neil Armstrong came out and said, no, we absolutely didn't do it. It doesn't matter, right? It's one person telling a story. There's any number of reasons why a person could be wrong about the story. What does the bulk of the evidence tell you? If you're a football fan and you realize that that Kansas City beat the Eagles, you wouldn't have a hard time believing the story because you've watched Kansas City play all year long, right? And you know they're a good team. And you've watched the Eagles play and you know they're a good team. And you watch the two teams play and they're both good teams. That's why it was so close. Right? The result wouldn't be in doubt. And if I told you that I had somebody who told me, no, the Eagles actually won that game, you'd laugh me out of the room. Right? You'd say, well, who is this guy? It's a guy I know. And by the way, the guy I know who said that the Eagles won the game knows a lot about football.
Oh,
He knows a lot about football.
Insider.
You know what ought to be mandatory? Freshman year, sophomore year, I can't remember. I took Philosophy 101, Intro to Logic, and it ought to be mandatory. In fact, it ought to be mandatory in high school. Just because, Bill, you mentioned about teaching people how to think. Not what, but how. And it was such a great class. It was also dry and difficult. That's when I started smoking. It took me like 15 years to quit. Seriously, it was the only way I could get through that class. Not in class, but afterwards. I'm like, oh my God, I need a cigarette. But being able to properly identify A as A is maybe the ultimate life skill, and we don't teach it anymore.
So I was thinking about this, and again, I don't want to make this so much about the moon landing as I want to make it about the phenomenon of me seeing this everywhere, where people are simply rejecting conventional wisdom because it's conventional wisdom. That kind of conservatism is about conventional wisdom and common sense, right? That's kind of what we're about. So I see this and I start thinking, how would I put together arguments that other people would find convincing? And I thought the argument that somebody said that the Eagles won the Super Bowl is a great example of that. The guy's either lying or he's nuts or he really believes that the Super Bowl was won by the Eagles. Maybe he tuned out early, who knows? But that's not the result, right? And I'm finding myself filled with a sense of real despair when I see how flimsy the arguments that they're putting forward are. Who took the picture of Neil coming down the ladder? That's it. That's what
I've never
you've
heard
got?
that one.
No, but that's what you've got.
It was a Japanese tourist.
The lines aren't parallel. Well, okay. Let's have a drone. This is how I'm going to do the case. A drone looking down on parking lot. Yes, the lines on the parking lot are parallel. Yes, okay. Now fly the drone down to eye level. Are the lines parallel now? No, the lines are diverging now because that's what parallax is, right? This kind of thing. So it's not. I'm not trying to argue the case for the moon landing here. I'm hoping I get a chance to do that later. What I'm arguing is that people are starting to lose their minds, and they're starting to cling to the flimsiest of evidence in order to fulfill an emotional need. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, right? I don't have an emotional need to believe that the moon landing happened. If the evidence was compelling that it didn't, then I would say it didn't. But there's something that is driving this that is not rational. It's not based on science. It's just an emotional, visceral hatred of a system that is spilling over into everything, and it's got me deeply concerned. I didn't know if you guys had any closing thoughts on that.
It's beclowning the movement. I mean, and that's the problem. It's like when you see people who would otherwise find agreement with you philosophically or ideologically or even theologically, and now they're often in raving about the flat Earth and the moon that has never had a human visitor. It's making a laughing stock because people know who they are online, and now all of a sudden they're saying this. And it's like, you know what? You're not paying attention to facts. You're just ranting because you're hurt. You're upset. You're angry that somebody said something dishonest in the government. Well, wake up. You're on planet Earth. Somebody said something dishonest in every place you went and everything you saw today. So yeah, it just makes our case more tenuous because people will look at him and go, oh, are you the kind of conservatives who believe we never went to the moon? Like that guy I just saw ranting on YouTube?
Yeah, and let me add to what Scott was just saying. It's harder to beclown the left for being disassociated from reality because that is the base of leftism. You can treat people like ants and make it work. Well, no, you can't. But they've got a century or more of practice in making these arguments, and they don't need to use facts because there aren't any. They've been making stuff up since the very beginning. When conservatives disassociate from reality, it's very easy to mock us because that's what conservatism is based on, the things that have worked in the past because they are grounded in fact and in reality.
And I think that Scott, you gave me a good thing to close on here. Because the number of people who believe that the Earth is flat is increasing on a daily basis. And there's no amount of evidence that will convince them otherwise. You can show them photos of the Earth from space. You can show them a series of photos from the Earth from space. You can show them pictures from either high altitude balloon or something that shows the curvature of the Earth. They will not believe it. And if you're one of those people that believe that the moon landing didn't happen, but you still believe the Earth is round, then I have to ask you, what is the difference in the level of evidence? Because there are people out there making compelling cases for why the Earth is flat and providing all kind of blockers proving that it can't possibly be round. Because if it were round, why don't people fall off the bottom of the Earth? It doesn't matter if I tell you why. If you are so determined to be on the cutting edge of arcane knowledge, or you're so determined to show how much smarter you are than the sheep, or whatever is driving it, right? If we live in the 23rd century where the number of people who believe the Earth is flat is increasing on a daily basis in Western societies, then we're in real trouble, right? Because we're not talking about politics anymore. Now we're talking about a mass psychosis event. Now we're talking about a series of emotional stimuli that have occurred to make normally sensible people believe nutty things. And this is something that concerns me very, very deeply. And the thing that I'm most concerned about is, for a significant number of people, it's not a question of evidence. There is no evidence. There's no amount of evidence that will convince them otherwise, because this isn't about evidence. This is about a core emotional, I don't even want to say a belief so much as a need. That's the word, a need, yeah. Just something else to put on your plate to worry about, I guess. But nevertheless,
I refuse.
Well, yeah, I got to solve this whole issue by saying don't read the YouTube comments ever.
Oh, by the way, the YouTube comments that are about to happen, that because you slipped up. You slipped up and you revealed that we live in the 23rd century. Let me just make it clear right now.
Did I say 23rd century? I also got the Super Bowl.
You let everybody know where we're really broadcasting.
I thought I heard 21st. Well, who knows? I'll believe what I want to believe.
Right.
Yes.
So 2023, and we label all of our shows 0, 1, 14, 23. Okay. I've slipped up, and so I've therefore revealed that the 12 Saturn V's that we launched in front of millions and millions of people.
That's my point.
That's not relevant to compared to the fact that he got the year and the Super Bowl champs wrong.
Yeah. It's awesome. Don't you love the internet?
I don't want to live on this planet anymore. I want to hang out with the people that are actually going to other planets, like we did in 1969.
Awesome.
All right, that'll do it. My voice is done. I'm done, and we'll see you next time on Right Angle.